Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most fascinating and honestly deeply embedded concepts in the human psyche. We are looking at that incredibly fine, often super blurry line between rightful justice and criminal vengeance. Because throughout history, we've constantly had to grapple with a really tough scenario. What do we do when the systems built to protect us totally fail? Or when a crime is just so heinous that a standard punishment doesn't even come close to feeling like enough? So from ancient emperors all the way up to modern-day cyber hackers, we are going to trace exactly how our idea of retribution has evolved. Okay, let's dive into this because this right here is the fundamental question we've got to keep in the back of our minds today. Is justice really just vengeance with a shiny badge? Or is vengeance just justice without the patience? To figure this out, we're going to descend step by step into some serious moral gray areas. But to actually appreciate the gray, we first need to rewind to a time when the world operated entirely in black and white. Section 1. Imperial Retribution, the Black and White Era of Revenge. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what that looked like. Back in the ancient era, monarchs held absolute, unquestioned power. When they were wronged, there were no courts, no appeals, and absolutely no debates over a proportional response. Vengeance was swift, and as Princess Olga of Kiev shows us, it was unbelievably brutal. So, back in 945, a tribe called the Drevlians assassinated Prince Igor, and they did it by literally tying his legs to two bent birch trees and letting them snap back. Just horrific. Then, they actually had the audacity to suggest their prince should marry Igor's widow, Princess Olga. Big mistake, huge. Olga unleashed a legendary four-part revenge. First, she buried their ambassadors alive. Then, she locked their nobles in a bathhouse and burned them alive. Third, she got thousands of their soldiers drunk at a feast and had her armies slaughter them. And for the grand finale, she demanded a tribute of pigeons and sparrows from the Drevlian city, tied burning sulfur to the birds' legs, and let them fly back home. She burned the entire city to ash. Which brings us to another ruler who, frankly, didn't understand the concept of a measured response. Genghis Khan. In 1218, the Khan sent a peaceful caravan of merchants to the Khwarezmian Empire to set up some trade, but the local governor executed them. So Genghis Khan calmly sends diplomats to negotiate. The result? The Khwarezmian Shah executes the diplomats and shaves the beards of the Mongol envoys. And in that culture, that was the ultimate disrespect. Now, take a look at that staggering number. 15 million. That is the estimated number of people Genghis Khan wiped out in retaliation. He didn't just go after the guys who did it. He rolled up with a 200,000-man army and literally erased the entire Khwarezmian Empire from the face of the earth. Section 2. Outlaws and Anti-Heroes, Fighting Corrupt Systems. So that's what it looks like when people at the very top exact revenge. But what happens when the system itself is totally rigged? Let's move to Japan and see how this builds a picture of ultimate patient loyalty with the 47 Ronin. In 1701 Japan, there's this deeply corrupt official named Kira. He relentlessly insults a young lord named Asano until Asano finally snaps and draws a weapon inside the shogun's castle. The punishment? Asano is forced to commit ritual suicide, leaving his samurai completely masterless, which makes them Ronin. And Kira? He gets off scot-free. But Asano's men didn't just rush in blind. They played the long game. For 2 whole years, they dispersed. They disguised themselves as carpenters and merchants. Their leader even pretended to be a raging drunk just to lower Kira's guard. Then, on a snowy night in January 1703, 47 of them ambush Kira's estate, execute him with the exact same blade their master had used, and then peacefully turn themselves in. They completely accepted their own execution just to fulfill their code of honor. Now, let's jump forward a bit to 19th century Australia and meet Ned Kelly. Kelly grew up deeply impoverished, dealing with a highly corrupt British colonial police force that constantly harassed his family. After his mother was thrown in prison unjustly, Kelly basically decided, you know what, this whole system is rigged. He formed a gang and started robbing banks. But here's the catch. During these robberies, he treated the hostages incredibly well, and crucially, he would burn the bank's mortgage documents. He was literally freeing poor farmers from their crushing debts. This whole crusade culminated in this massive, famous final standoff. Kelly actually marched out to fight the police wearing a homemade suit of bulletproof plow steel armor. To the law, he was a highly dangerous outlaw, but to the struggling working class, he was an absolute folk hero.
But honestly, perhaps the most unbelievable arc of any vigilante goes to Phoolan Devi in India. She was born into a low caste, her family's land was stolen from them, and she faced horrific abuse from higher caste villagers before being kidnapped and assaulted by bandits. But instead of letting that break her, she actually took over the bandit gang. She led them back to the village that had tormented her and orchestrated the Benmai massacre, executing the men who had abused her. She managed to evade a massive nationwide manhunt for years because the lower caste protected her. They saw her as their ultimate champion. Eventually, she surrendered, served 10 years behind bars, and get this, upon her release, she was elected to India's parliament. She served as a national politician until her assassination. Just a wildly complex legacy. Section 3. The moral gray area. Modern vigilantes. Okay, so we've seen vengeance from untouchable kings, and we've seen it from we oppressed. But as we transition into the modern era, things get so much more complicated. We start seeing groups operating entirely outside the law just to enforce their own version of order. Before we get into them, let's clearly define our terms here. What exactly is a vigilante? Basically, it's a self-appointed citizen or group of citizens who take law enforcement into their own hands, completely without official or legal authority. They see a gap in the justice system, and they just step right in to fill it.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how the methods of vigilantes have completely adapted to our modern world. You've got the Guardian Angels, who formed in 1970s New York to do unarmed subway patrols in those signature red berets just to deter crime. Then you have Anonymous, the sprawling, decentralized collective using massive cyber attacks to expose government or corporate corruption. And you even have guys like Phoenix Jones out in Seattle, who literally put on a superhero suit to patrol the streets. And we're presenting these completely impartially because the public reaction is always split right down the middle. Supporters see these folks as brave, necessary protectors, stepping up when the police are too slow or indifferent. But critics, they strongly argue that these groups lack legal authority, they have zero accountability, no proper training, and often end up making dangerous situations even worse.
Section 4. Justice or just crime. The deepest gray.
All right, this brings us to the real climax of our explainer. These are the incredibly complex, highly personal moral dilemmas that are absolutely going to force you to grapple with your own internal compass. When a crime is just unbearably horrific, is a vigilante response actually justified, or is it literally just another crime? In 1984, a man named Jeff Doucette kidnapped and severely abused an 11-year-old boy named Jody Plauché. Doucette was caught and was being escorted by the police through the Baton Rouge airport to face trial. Well, Jody's father, Gary Plauché, was waiting right by a bank of payphones. As Doucette was walked past, Gary stepped out and fatally shot him in the head. And this entire act was caught right on live news cameras. The debate surrounding this is insanely intense. On one hand, you have this overwhelming public sympathy for a desperate, heartbroken father acting on pure primal instinct to protect his kid. But on the other hand, legal critics strongly warned that Doucette was already in handcuffs. If we start bypassing the courts to execute someone who is already in police custody, doesn't that threaten the very foundation of our entire justice system? And the legal outcome of Gary Plauché's actions? It basically poured gasoline on this fire. Plauché pleaded no contest to manslaughter. The judge determined he wasn't a threat to society at large, so he received a suspended sentence, some probation, and community service. He served absolutely zero actual prison time for an assassination that millions watched on live television. Naturally, this incredibly light punishment intensified debates all over the country. Should extreme emotional circumstances be allowed to dictate the rule of law, or does showing leniency in a case like this just swing the door wide open for total chaos? So the crucial point is, what happens when the vigilante is fighting something that is widely recognized as a profound, undeniable moral evil? Let's take a look at John Brown during the 1850s, in a period known as Bleeding Kansas. At the time, pro-slavery forces were actively terrorizing and sacking anti-slavery settlements. John Brown deeply, fiercely believed that slavery was an absolute abomination and that peaceful politics were never, ever going to fix it. So, he retaliated. He and his men literally dragged pro-slavery settlers out of their homes in the middle of the night and hacked them to pieces with broadswords. His actions were, as you might guess, incredibly polarizing. To some people, he was an absolute hero, taking direct, necessary action against a horrific institution. To others, he was a deranged murderer, operating completely outside the boundaries of the law. And Brown didn't stop there. His crusade escalated massively in 1859 when he orchestrated a raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His grand plan was to seize all their weapons, distribute them, and spark a massive, armed uprising of enslaved people. Militarily speaking, the raid was a complete failure. He was quickly surrounded by U.S. Marines, captured, and ultimately put on trial for treason. However, while the raid failed in its immediate tactical goal, it acted as the definitive spark that sent the United States spiraling straight into the Civil War.
Right before he was executed for his crimes, as he walked to the gallows, John Brown handed one final note to his jailer. It read, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood." It is such a haunting, deeply prophetic statement, and it leaves us with this incredibly complex legacy regarding the violent, bloody cost of enforcing justice when the law itself is fundamentally unjust.
So, we've covered a lot today. We've seen rulers erase entire cities. We've seen outlaws transform into politicians, grieving fathers bypass the courts entirely, and zealots spark literal wars. And here is the crazy part. In every single one of these stories, the people enacting the vengeance felt 100% completely justified. But as we've explored, acting outside the law carries massive, sometimes completely catastrophic consequences. So after taking this journey through all these historical examples in our explainer today, I want to leave you with this final thought to reflect on. When the system completely fails or when the pain is just too great, where do you personally draw the line between true justice and just another crime?